Now, I just want to start with a formal disclaimer that this isn't going to be a fancy video with fancy editing. There's not going to be any bells and whistles. In fact, I'm just sitting here at 4 a.m. writing a brief script in Notepad trying to organize my thoughts, so I don't know if I'll be uploading this over some kind of gameplay footage or if you'll just be looking at a black screen. You might hear my chair squeak, you might hear a cat meow, you might hear the sounds of my birds upstairs, you might hear the bell around my kitten's neck that helps keep me and my husband from accidentally stepping on him because he's so tiny. Because of quarantine, my sleep schedule is completely out of whack, and I spend most of my evenings binging Sea of Thieves until everyone goes to sleep. Then I browse Sims 2 mods while watching YouTube videos on one of my other monitors. Lately, I've been focusing primarily on any and all content surrounding the infamous Yandere dev and Dr. Apis' Lovesick. If you aren't familiar with the drama surrounding Yandere dev, please, I ask you to go catch up via your method of choice. My goal of this video isn't to summarize everything up until this point, as there have been many content creators who have done that, and quite formidably. If you're looking for an objective timeline of events, I and many others recommend the Right Opinions video, but I can't bring Yandere Dev up without also endorsing Kappa Kaiju and Thaf9, two extremely underrated content creators who deserve your time if you're interested. I'm surprised not a lot of people seem to bring up Eris Akamatsu's videos either, and you can also check out Nuxtaku if you're more into memes and his infectious energy. I know many people also cite the re-upload of the video, The Rise and Fall of Yandere Dev. It's not a terrible video, it's just a little dated in my opinion, albeit it's still worthy of your time and attention should you choose to go that route. Finally, I also follow the Game Sleuths channel, where I usually go to find candid discussion on the topic as well as some memes. That being said, if you're still with me, hello. This isn't the usual content I post on my channel. In fact, my channel has been dead for quite a bit of time due to a lot of factors, and I hope to revive it someday, but I don't know when or with what, so all of my activity's actually been diverted to Twitch for now. I'm assuming from this point on that you're listening to me talk because you're at least somewhat familiar with what's been going on with Dr. Apis' game Lovesick, which was announced a little over a week ago at this point. And if you aren't, Lovesick is a reimagining of Yandere Simulator that's drawn quite a lot of ire from Yandere Dev and his community. And I'd argue that it's been amplified by events merely a few days prior to Lovesick's announcement. Now, I don't want to go into a long timeline of events here, but as a quick summary, on July 3rd, a user on Kiwi Farms posted about Yandere Dev's Reddit account being stolen. Shortly after, a user named Not Based or Red Pilled came forward and claimed responsibility, and it didn't take long for the subreddit that Yandere Dev paid $3,000 for to be filled with cum chalice memes and to have its ban list wiped clean and replaced with Yandev's mods. Official Yandere Simulator content returned to the Yandere Simulator subreddit, and Yandere_Simulator remains in its current, interesting state. In browsing the Kiwi Farms thread, you'll see a lot of discussion about Yandere Simulator's code, Yandere Dev's email account, which was also stolen, and then some arguing about whether or not the quote-unquote hack was worth the time, whether it should have been done with such pomp and circumstance, etc. While I have my criticisms about Kiwi Farms, of course, I do recommend browsing the thread dedicated to Yandere Dev. It's nearly 2,000 pages now, and a wealth of information. One thing that I feel is a bit unfortunate is that a lot of its content is used for Yandere Dev exposed videos, but no one ever seems to really credit it. If I'm not mistaken, Kappa Kaiju is the only one I've ever heard cite them in his videos, but I could be wrong about that. On July 4th, a user posted Dr. Apis' announcement for his game Lovesick to Kiwi Farms. One of the game's biggest claims to fame was included in the description. It took about 2 weeks for Dr. Apis and another programmer to create everything featured in the announcement. And really, browsing the comments of the original upload, there was a lot of hype from both critics of Yandere Dev and for people who just seemed genuinely interested in what the game had to offer. Now, I want to be transparent and say that I was actually a fan of Yandere Dev until 2018. I knew absolutely nothing about him outside of his YouTube content and the Let's Plays I watched from Markiplier, Razbowski, and Jacksepticeye. I believe the first expose video I saw was by Repzilla, and it sent me down this rabbit hole that I shamelessly admit I've never climbed out of. I don't know if it's because I enjoy a good drama, or if it's because I find Yandere Dev's behavior interesting from a psychological perspective. I can't play innocent. I've sipped the tea from a great distance, and I still sip it regularly. On July 7th, I was surprised to open my YouTube feed and see that Dr. Apis uploaded an apology to Yandere Dev and his volunteers. I was also disappointed. I know I wasn't the only one, but just speaking from a personal level, it was such a shame to see someone cave so quickly, and I really wanted to understand why. So then my eyes fell to the pinned comment, and there was Cameron F305 accepting Dr. Apis' apology, praising him for his maturity, telling him to learn from his mistakes, etc. If you don't know who Cameron F305 is, he's the one responsible for the music you hear in Yandere Simulator. You can also look up Cameron's username on Wikitubia if you want more info on him. However, just from reading it, it's obvious that he wrote it himself, which is all fine and good, but just consider the source. And this video really isn't about him. However, I'm only bringing him up because I did chat with him a bit in his pinned comment on the apology video. It's unfortunately no longer there, and I regret not taking screenshots. Had I ever anticipated making a brief commentary video like this, I absolutely would have. I looked at my notifications to try and recover some, and what you're seeing right now is unfortunately the only one that showed up when I did. Anyway, in the brief back and forth I had with Cameron, we discussed a few things. He asserted that 99% of the assets in Yandere Simulator are original, which is absolutely not true and very easy to disprove. I also want to point out that this is the same thing that Yandere Dev himself says, and his fans just regurgitate the things that he says as if repeating it magically makes it true, and really it's like he needs someone to repeat that narrative to give him validation. Cameron also regurgitated more Yandere Dev dialogue about that false narrative. I also thought it was interesting that he praised the Right Opinions video while also chastising Thaf9's portion of it. I asked him to prove that the narrative surrounding Yandere Dev was false. This is a huge thing for me. While I acknowledge that a good portion of what surrounds the Yandere Dev drama is sheer idiocy, there are very valid and very real concerns there, and no one really offers any proof that this narrative is false. Cameron deleted his comment after I asked him for proof that the narrative is false. He later said this was a mistake, and I choose to believe that's true given that he continued to respond to me for a bit. I don't want to criticize Cameron. I know that some people criticize him, and I see people criticize him. It's really hard for me to be critical of him because I remember quite well what I was like at his age, and I don't mean that in a condescending manner. I mean that as in, I'm 33 and I still don't consider myself fully cooked, but I'm certainly not the same person I was a decade ago. Cameron later said he intended on making a video about the drama and wasn't going to try to prove his point in a YouTube comment. I don't know when he plans on releasing that video, or if he does. I just want to say that this highlights an enormous issue for me, and this was one thing I said that Cameron agreed on. Specifically, he said, I agree with the first sentence, and that sentence was, if Yandere Dev wants to change the narrative surrounding his name, there needs to be efforts to change that narrative. And by that I mean not tacking things onto the end of your website like you're writing an article for Snopes, not releasing Hate and Shame Part 2, not suicide baiting people you deem as a threat. The narrative cannot be one-sided. It's very easy to do, and I'm certain there are many content creators who would be willing to give him an unbiased platform for an interview, and many content creators who would do it justice and with as much objectivity as they possibly can. Yandere Dev is so obsessed with controlling the narrative around him, but it must always be one-sided, and honestly, it's a very manipulative tactic. But banning people, and sincerely, absolutely, a lot of these people do deserve bans. I get it. There are absolutely people who are no longer interested in having a sensible discussion about things. But there are people who do. 100%. Just the other day, give me a moment because I have to read this post because I just can't. About a week ago, a user posted in the Yandere Simulator subreddit, the one that they've all moved back to, why do I get a higher FPS in GTA Online than in Yandere Simulator? Then he proceeds to list his specs. As you can see, he also updated the post and says that he's been banned because he said this. Now, I've not confirmed whether or not this is true, but I have a very difficult time believing that it isn't true, given, people have been banned for far smaller things in both the subreddit and the Discord. Somebody responds, I remember Yandere Simulator had a history of optimization issues. They'll hopefully be ironed out as development goes on. On a completely unrelated note, I was looking at buying the exact laptop with the same specs. Do you have any massive complaints about it? Then Yandere Dev himself responds, history of optimization issues is a really weird and misleading way to frame the situation. It's an in-development video game, so judging the performance doesn't make sense, since the state of the game during development doesn't reflect the state that the game will be in at release. Any observation, like the FPS is low, is completely invalid, since that will stop being a true statement once the game goes through an optimization pass and FPS issues are fixed. Judging a game's performance when it's not even finished just doesn't make any sense. And someone else responds, in development, but for how long? If Yandere Simulator was released in 2014, then it is almost 6 years old. I'm sure that the frame rate and optimization could have been bumped up in 6 years alongside the bug fixes and new features. I have a feeling that this person might also be banned. And then this is Yandere Dev's only other comment on this thread, and I just gonna try to get through it. Now, this post is also the top post on the Yandere Simulator subreddit, so you can go look at this discussion right now. If you go to the Yandere Simulator subreddit and sort by top posts, it's still there. Yandere Dev responds, yes, development began 6 years ago, but Yandere Simulator is much more ambitious and complex than an average indie game. The premise itself may seem straightforward, but the number of features and depth of mechanics is comparable to that of a AAA open-world sandbox title. It's unrealistic to expect a game like this to reach the optimization stage in less than 6 years simply due to the unusually large scope and deep complexity of the game, coupled with the fact that it's mostly being developed by a single person. Nobody can accurately estimate how long it should take to reach the optimization stage, because there isn't a pre-existing project that Yandere Sim can be compared to. No solo developer has ever attempted to build a social stealth school simulation sandbox game before. The length of time that it takes for a single man to develop a game like this has simply not been established yet, so it's been 6 years, you should have optimized the game by now, is simply not a valid statement. Even with the above information in mind, I do think that the game should be further into development by now, but there are factors that massively slow down the game's development and put the game way behind schedule. Early in the game's development, I adopted an unreasonable update schedule, one major feature every 2 weeks. As a result, the game was developed under crunch time for several years straight, 15-hour workdays, no vacations, constantly sacrificing physical and psychological health. This caused me to become burned out, which severely reduced my productivity. Due to my ongoing obligation to devote most of my time to Yandere Simulator, I have never had an opportunity to recover from this burnout and return to normal levels of productivity. There is another factor that is much more important than that, though. I have been mischaracterized, misportrayed, misrepresented, and character assassinated by drama YouTubers who financially benefit from producing content where they ridicule, shame, humiliate, and vilify their target. Going through this experience has caused me to feel like my life and career are permanently destroyed, which has killed my motivation to work on this game, reducing my productivity further. The game could have been further into development by now, but being slandered and harassed on a daily basis for 5 years slowed me down. I know that I'm setting myself up for ridicule here, but I do pity Yandere Dev, just not in the way he seems to want people to pity him. I pity him because I believe that he believes he's in the right, but at this point I wonder if any attention is good attention to him. And I say this because he's said himself that he doesn't want to fade into obscurity or be forgotten, citing that if he were to revert developing Yandere Simulator into his hobby so he can watch anime and play video games again, then someone else may release a competing game before him. And this need for justification, for validation, brings me back to Dr. Apis. This is a screenshot I got from Kiwi Farms. There's more to this conversation, but the only screenshots that I found were taken from a video done by Choco Nanakens. And I don't feel right taking screenshots of someone else's video to insert into my video, but here's one that's been widely circulated. I got this one at Kiwi Farms, but I've also seen it on Reddit, Twitter, and Discord. Yandere Dev says to Dr. Apis, I'm not sure if you're going to care, but I really want to express something to you. My life has become an absolute hell since you announced your project. Many of my friends have abandoned me. I receive dozens of messages per hour for people saying, haha, there's no reason to support you anymore, and the amount of harassment I receive per day has tripled. Your apology video didn't resolve the problem. Tens of thousands of people are still spreading the narrative that it's possible to recreate all of my work within 2 days. Every day is a nightmare now. It's nothing but nonstop abuse and harassment. I just wanted to work on a cool anime girl game project in peace, and now there is nothing but suffering and misery. I can't have a peaceful life anymore, and it's because of the existence of Lovesick convinces people that they are justified in treating me like garbage. What hurts more than anything is that Lovesick is the name I announced I was going to use, and now I can't even use that name anymore because it's associated with all of this pain and harassment. Everything I built has been stolen from me and destroyed, and nobody realizes or cares that it's all because they've been misled into believing things that aren't true. I have a lot of difficulty wrapping my head around this, even more so considering I'm only a year older than this man, and I cannot be the only one who sees this as Yandere Dev using Lovesick and Dr. Apis as a scapegoat. This narrative, the narrative around me is false, spreading the narrative, they're spreading this narrative. This has been going on for 6 years, and he's trying to get Dr. Apis to accept that his mental health is in his hands. Does Yandere Dev want us to believe that his mental health is so fragile that he cannot handle a competitor? Not only that, from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it would seem that Yandere Dev finds Dr. Apis' announcement too coincidental for him to not be involved with the temporary loss of his Reddit and email account. I don't know Dr. Apis, I've never spoken to him, and I can only go with my gut that the information I found on Kiwi Farms and Discord that I really have a hard time believing that Dr. Apis is involved. And poor Dr. Apis I truly believe didn't want involved in any of this. He went from denying that Yandere Dev threatened suicide and claiming the leaked screenshots as fake, to then admitting that he lied, because he was scared that Yandere Dev would act on it. It took me a bit to figure out what Yandere Dev's behavior reminded me of. I'm not sure if you're familiar with a streamer and YouTuber named Good Games Greg, known for his Blade and Souls content. In 2017, it was revealed that he was threatening suicide underage fans if they didn't send him nudes. It's a disgusting story, and if you're interested, I have to direct you to Critical's reading of some of the messages with his friends. It's a little brutal to listen to, but just the fact that it's Critical presenting the content, it kind of softens the blow, at least for me. I feel like I could listen to that guy tell me that my life is ending in 2 hours and I'd still be very calm about it. Having had loved ones suffer from abusive relationships and having suffered my own, it's easy to see that Yandere Dev's behavior is emotionally manipulative and abusive. Suicide is often used as a control tactic in an abusive relationship because it instills fear, obligation, and guilt. Having had loved ones suffer from abusive relationships and having suffered from my own, it's easy to see that Yandere Dev's behavior is emotionally manipulative and abusive. Suicide is often used as a control tactic in an abusive relationship because it instills fear, obligation, and guilt. While from the outside looking in, it's easy to say their actions are not your responsibility. Anyone who has had someone use this to gain leverage in a relationship knows it's terrifying. And please allow me to clarify, you don't have to be in a romantic relationship with someone for them to abuse you. You can have abusive friends, abusive colleagues, abusive acquaintances. It doesn't matter. It's the same behavior, just in a different scenario. Just last year, I actually released myself from an extremely emotionally abusive friendship that took me about 7 years to really hammer down. This was someone who was even in my wedding party, and I honestly had no clue how abusive they were until the friendship neared its end. I'm better off, but in many ways, while my interaction with Yandere Dev's fan base and YouTube comments and on Reddit have shown me just how alarmingly young a lot of them are, I also see them as somewhat codependent on Yandere Dev and Yandere Dev codependent on them. And I have to go down the checklist of codependency here. Low self-esteem, people-pleasing or the inability to say no, and if anyone says no, they're silenced, thus there's a fear of even blinking in Yandere Dev's direction. Poor boundaries. For that one, I just want to cite the fact that Yandere Dev calls his followers F kittens. Reactivity. Reactivity refers to feeling threatened by disagreements or having to react and become defensive immediately. Denial is a huge one. It's extremely difficult for me to place any blame on someone who I still see as young and impressionable. Ultimately, that's probably why Yandere Dev surrounds himself with young and impressionable people, because he feels threatened when he doesn't feel like he's the smartest one in the room or that he doesn't have control of the narrative. And it's a shame because while his fans are codependent on him, he's codependent on them for that validation. When he says things like nobody cares, it's pretty easy to find a lot of people who do care. And he knows that they care. He just needs to repeatedly hear that they care, and they feel the need to tell him they care because then they in turn also feel validated, as if they're helping Yandere Dev when in reality they're inadvertently enabling him. Again, I really can't blame anyone I deem as young, vulnerable, or impressionable, but Dr. Apis, if by some odd chance you're listening to this, I just want to say I'm really glad you retracted your apology, and I truly hope that you continue with Lovesick. I'm sorry that you were pulled into this drama at such an inopportune time. I'm begging you, please don't let Yandere Dev use you as a scapegoat. I admire you for wanting to distance yourself from the toxicity, and you proved yourself the bigger person in this ugly scenario. I was initially disappointed that you apologized, but now that I have a better understanding of the situation, I feel confident in saying, I know why you did it. Right now, Yandere Dev is looking for a scapegoat, and he's not going to join Kiwi Farms and have a dialogue with anyone there. I quite frankly don't blame him, but it's fallen on your shoulders, unfortunately, and that's just not fair. If you need people who are reasonable to shoulder that burden, there's a lot of us here. You don't owe anyone an apology or an explanation, and you've done the best that you can so far, and I really commend you for that. And Yandere Dev, if you're listening to this, which I highly doubt you're not, I repeat something I've said numerous times. If you want to change the narrative, there needs to be efforts to change the narrative. Until then, you need to leave Dr. Apis alone.